than 1.5 miles.
Yeah, it's about 1.522 or so, at least the people who own and operate the place would let us have. But it is a high banked racetrack. The turns are banked about 24 degrees, which creates tremendous G-forces on not only the cars but also the drivers.
And Larry, you had an opportunity to examine one of the cars and how they change from one racetrack to another. Here is Larry with Jim McGee.
At Milwaukee, these race cars were right down on the track as set up for race conditions. Here at Atlanta, this distance between the bottom of the race car and the track is the most visible difference in the setup of the cars. But unfortunately for crew chiefs like Jim McGee, it's not quite that simple, is it, Jim?
No, that's it. That's just one of the features that we have. Another one of the areas that we have to work in is the front and rear wing configurations. We run a lot less wing here than we do at Milwaukee. Also, in the spring area, the springs here are much stiffer because of the high banking and the speed of the car.
Jim, why do you have to stiffen up the race car? Simply the banks being a factor doesn't seem like enough. Why do you have to do that?
Well, it's the higher speed that you run into the bank at, and it has a tendency to sink the car down into the ground, so you have to have a heavier spring to hold it up.
So this car doesn't move up and down on its own axis as much here at this track then, right?
No, that's right. The travel is limited a little more. We have a much harder tire compound for the higher sustained speeds. The steering gears in the cars are slowed down considerably because of the high speed.
How many inches does the driver actually move the wheel, say, one typical lap around Atlanta?
Atlanta, the driver, believe it or not, would only probably move the wheel about an inch or an inch and a half. That's, you know, just a slight flick of the wrist is all you have to do to go around this.
The speeds are so high and sustained, you just don't have to move the wheel any more than that.
No, the car does its own moving. It drifts, and it takes the line of the bank.
Now, what about the cockpit itself? Now, the drivers are subjected to tremendous G-forces here. Do you have to change that, too?
Yes, this is probably the hardest racetrack on a driver because he has to really brace himself for the bank, so that we have to add a lot of extra padding in this area and behind him. And then a lot of the drivers use extra helmet straps to kind of keep the centrifugal force from bending their necks.
Now, the engine setup, I think most of us would assume no change as far as setting up the engine from one racetrack to another.
No, here for the longer racetracks, we use a different cam configuration. We use what we call a long track cam setup. Also, we have a lot larger turbocharger because of the high-speed running, and also the exhaust systems are quite a bit larger for the larger racetracks.
Now, as we move back to the rear of the race car, the feeling I'm having in the back of my mind is that these cars on these 24-degree banks that they're in at least half the time on the racetrack, there must be a tendency for the car to roll over or to succumb, so to speak, to centrifugal force. How do you prevent that?
Well, the larger springs, you know, help to compensate for that, but also we use actually stiffer roll bars. We have roll bars in the car that have a tendency to keep the car from rolling, and we use larger roll bars here on these high bank racetracks, too.
Well, a tremendous amount of change and preparation for preparing the machinery on this racetrack with the tremendous forces the cars are subjected to. And keep in mind, if all that time and effort and work is put into remodeling the race car because of all those forces, there's one other factor you have to consider. The driver, he has to prepare just a little differently also.